M1 came out, I've been having like little weird glitches with the Apollo using
Weird.
Thunderbolt. Super weird, man.
Strange. Yeah, I have all these students who have Apollos, and then when they're on Discord, they have to turn the Apollo off because if it's running at all, it like takes over their Discord audio, but it won't communicate with Discord. So it basically just like crashes Discord audio if you even have it plugged in. It's sad when it's happening to people who just bought the nicest interface, you know, like you think when you buy the really nice shit, you won't have to run into that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, today is sponsored by Universal Audio. So no, I'm just kidding. No, thankfully, I'm actually thinking about selling my Apollo, and I don't know. Do you have like favorite interfaces, like rack mountable 8-input interfaces?
I don't know. I mean, I've been using these SSL interfaces that I think are pretty solid, but I don't know. I don't have an 8-channel one. We have like the 4 and 6-channel ones. They're just kind of like home units, but they're nice. They sound good and they're affordable. They don't have all the fancy DSP stuff though. They're more stripped down, but it's just high quality hardware.
Nice. Is it USB-C?
Yeah.
Okay, that's the move. Maybe I'll check those out.
Yeah, check it out. I mean, if you're using all those Apollo plugins or Universal Audio plugins and you want the DSP, you're pretty much like stuck in their ecosystem, you know?
Yeah, unless you get like a PCI slot, or I have this satellite, so I have like an Octa satellite that I could still keep all the plugins and
cool.
just get
Nice.
a better interface.
Ballin', huh? You're balling out there.
No, dude, this thing's like the first like Gen 1. It's real old. It's covered in dust, and it like I had to change out the FireWire slot to convert it to a Thunderbolt 2. So this is like an old ass Universal satellite, but it's nice. It works.
Nice.
So.
Motu products that were all FireWire, and I have like, 3 different dongles converting the FireWire into something that's modern, but I still use them. They're ADAT too, so they're great with the push 3.
Oh, very nice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you've been doing like a lot of push 3 workshops, I've been seeing on the gram. Yeah. And you just did the Chicago Ableton user group, which is probably one of my favorites, honestly.
I told Thomas, I was like, is that the best user group in the world? And he was like, well, no, but okay, maybe. I mean, I started it because him and Orville started it. And yeah, every time I've been on it a few times, and it's always like viral level. I mean, it's crazy. We do user groups here in the Twin Cities, and we get 10, 15 people to show up, and they do it, and there's like 40, 50 people every time. And even when it's not Virtual Riot, they still get a really good turnout, so
it's in a cool kind of like industrial venue too. It's got that like underground kind of artist vibe, and Orville's the man.
They just started using Spybar recently, I think, and it's just like, it's prime. It's cool because they have they got a bar, and they got a big projector screen and a nice sound system. And Virtual Riot and I got to throw down a little set in the end, and everyone was partying, and it was proper. So it was really
Sounds
cool.
Great, man. Well, I know you're hella busy these days. For people who don't know you, you were on the podcast back in the day for the Ableton Certified Trainer series that I did, which was really fun. So welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks, bro. Thanks for having me back.
Absolutely, man. You're a busy dude. You're running Slam Academy. You're like doing your own music thing. You are teaching and traveling a lot, it seems like. And you're writing a new book. You wrote a new book.
Yep. And so during COVID, I was like, it's time to do the mega brain dump. I've been teaching for 25 years. And I was like, I have all these thousands of great lesson plans and kind of aha moments from the classroom that I just wanted to record. So I started writing a book. And then by the time I got done with it, it was like, 600 pages. And after a bunch of technical edits, I realized it was actually 2 books. So put them both out now. And I've got Sound Design for Electronic Music 1 and 2, and they're both really cool. And the first book covers all the essential things you need to know to create your own original sounds using synthesizers. So it's analog synthesis, FM synthesis, all sorts of advanced modulation and sequencing tricks and all that. And then the second book is really a little more creative focused. It kind of assumes you've already read the first book or you know how synths and audio effects work and stuff. So the second book covers advanced synthesis techniques and sampling techniques and then effects processing. So if you're out there and you're already pretty comfortable getting around with the synthesizer and you know what like basic things are like pulse width modulation and oscillator sync and distortion and harmonics and all that, and you're comfortable with all that, the second book would be a really good one to check out. You can get them both on Amazon. They're available there. All you got to do is just search Ableton sound design and it'll be the first thing that pops up. So that's been really fun. It was a major release to get those out, and I'm really proud of them.
Yeah, man, it looks cool. I need to read the book. I haven't had the pleasure of reading them yet. When I get around to it, I want to.
Did I send you a copy?
I don't think so.
Well, remind me after the cast and I'll shoot you a copy of each of them.
I would love that. Yeah, thank
Cool.
you. I'll definitely check it out.
Illustrations in there and annotated screen grabs and dad jokes and all sorts of shit. So it's got a lot of character and it's really fun. So I'd love to see you check it out.
How do you know something's a dad joke? It's apparent.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's apparent.
it's apparent.
You just made a dad joke right there.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. Yeah.
God.
Now you know.
You should have kids. You're prime for this.
Oh, I already have a kid. He's like 2 years old and he's a cattle dog mix. But he's a total crackhead. He keeps me busy and he keeps me young for sure.
Cool. I'm glad
Yeah,
happy for
man.
you.
So why did you create these books in the first place? Like, was it just because you had extra time, or did you like take needs that you heard from your students constantly and was like, maybe this will just be easier for them to read it?
Yeah, honestly, I created the books because after 20 plus years of teaching in the classroom, I just had so many moments where I was like, wow, at the end of that session, it was like, because every student, and you know this too, every time you have a new student, like everyone thinks about sound a little differently. And especially with people who have less experience, you get questions that might seem like, what? But then when you think about it, you're like, oh, yeah, a lot of people probably think about it that way. And so I, as an educator, had so many moments where I was like, I never thought about it that way, but that's a totally valid perspective. And so ultimately I just spent, 20 plus years like triangulating around this art of creating your own original sound. Like I'm not a
Hmm.
composer. I was a DJ for many, many years, still am, but I just wanted ultimately like with the kind of music that I make, I come from techno background, but my biggest inspirations are artists like Aphex Twin,
Yeah.
even Herbie Hancock or whatever. And I just wanted to really be able to help people cultivate their own sound. And after having so many, like thousands of students in so many years, I just had this massive collection of teachings that I just wanted to purge and get out there. And I've seen how helpful my sound design teaching can be for people, because now that I still teach the sound design programs at Slam Academy, and I'm able to just eloquently roll out major breakthroughs in like every sentence, because I'm constantly selecting the most successful teachings from my entire life as an educator. And so getting somebody to the bottom of like the way sound really works and the physics of sound and the way music really works with harmonic ratios and all these maybe like seemingly complicated subjects, I've figured out how to just like put them in simple terms and have them make sense. And so someone can walk away and be like, now I understand what's happening under the hood of the instrument. And when I have a sound in my imagination, I know which parameters to adjust to make that
Hmm.
sound. And then you can start, extrapolating that same approach outward beyond synthesizers. And when you start getting into samplers and audio effects, that's when it really starts becoming like a superpower. That's why I wrote the book. I just wanted to impart that same kind of simplified but profound awareness and ability unto people
Yeah.
all around the world, because ultimately I can only teach so many people in a day.
Yeah. Well, you've been doing it long enough. I would imagine that you start to see what sticks and what doesn't.
Right.
And you're a fantastic teacher. I've seen you work your magic. We did that like Indianapolis user group a while
Hmm.
ago, which it shows that you've been doing it for a while.
Thanks, man.
Um, so with this book, are you focusing on any specific Ableton Live synths? Because I know a lot of it is based around Ableton Live.
Yeah.
So in
Yep.
which ones, and maybe even talk about your favorites and why.
Yeah, thanks. So, the first book I really wanted to keep entirely inside of the Ableton Live ecosystem, just because I wanted it to be accessible for people and not have to go out and buy other plugins and such. Frankly, I think a really great sounding synth that most modern producers overlook inside of Ableton is just the Ableton analog. It's kind of like a recreation of a mini Moog, and it just has
Yeah,
a really nice sound. The
it
filter and
does.
oscillators just have a really nice tone. So the first few chapters of the book that talk about the essentials of harmonics and sound and how to generate signal and understand the signal flow path of the synthesizer are based around the Ableton analog. And I frequently offer the disclaimer to my students. It's like, look, you're probably not going to use the analog for every single sound in your tracks. I mean, that's a fun pursuit, but it, just like a Moog synthesizer, an analog subtractive synthesizer is a relatively small playground. It's not like you're diving into the Death Star. You've got a really tiny amount of options there. And for that reason, I think it's a really great teaching tool, especially because no matter what synth or sampler or anything you're using out there, they're all going to have those same components that are adopted from the original analog subtractive synth. So
Yeah.
that's why I chose the Ableton Analog as my teaching tool. I just feel like it is a really timeless design, and you can apply that knowledge to Serum or Vital or, Contact even, or anything once you understand those core components. So we start with the analog, and then in the second half of the book, we lean over more so on the Ableton operator, which I frequently consider the Swiss Army knife of synthesizers, and FM synthesis is so essential for modern and vintage electronic music sounds, and the operator is such a great design. Analog and operator are the main focus of the first two books, but again, you're using FM synthesis and subtractive and additive synthesis in any modern synthesizers. So again, I don't really choose those synths because I think you're just going to use them for the rest of your life and not need any other synth. It's because that language, you're not just learning that instrument, you're learning a language that you can then apply to any new instrument that's ever going to come out. At least until you can just say, give me this synth, and then the AI makes it for you.
Right, exactly.
Yep. So then in the second book, we pick up with the Ableton Wavetable, which is in many ways the most powerful synth that's built into Ableton. And we touch a little bit on some of the other synths that are stock in Ableton. And then we do a lot of work inside of the simpler and sampler. Many great sound designers, myself included, have said your overall ability as a sound designer really boils down to your workflow with the sampler, because people say, what's your favorite synth? And I say sampler, because once you make recordings and you start layering them inside of a sampler and then applying advanced modulation and randomization and pitch shifting and FM and all these things to a recording, you are, the ceiling is completely lifted off of what's possible in your toolkit. So lean a lot on those instruments. And in the case of the Ableton sampler and simpler in particular, I teach those not because you're going to go and use a different sampler, but because those are really honestly the two best samplers I've ever used. The powers of the simpler are incredible, and the sampler with multi-sampling, I think for people who really want to create the incredible sounds that they can only imagine at this point, I would highly recommend stacking up some field recordings in the sampler and just start clicking on buttons and seeing what kind of stuff you can create. The Slam Academy YouTube channel has some really cool experimental sampler techniques, tutorials and workflows. With the sampler, you can take 100 hi-hats and throw them in there and hit a button, and it's going to randomly select which hi-hat you're hearing. There's so many different. And in Live 12 now, they have this round robin feature in the zones tab of the sampler. Yes. I don't know if you've bumped into that, but
that's really cool. Maybe explain that for people who don't know.
Yeah, for sure. So one of my favorite things to do with the sampler is to just put a bunch of recordings into one instance of the sampler and then have it, you had to use LFOs and randomization and a lot of tricky techniques to be able to every time you hit a button, you're hearing a different combination of sounds. But now in Live 12, they activated this round robin feature where all you need to do is show the zones tab of the sampler, throw a bunch of sounds in there, and then turn on the little RR. And then every time you click a key, you'll get a different selection or a different combination of sounds out of the instrument. Yeah. And so for happy accident generating and for creating really moving or polyrhythmic sequences of sounds, it just simplifies what previously took 20 clicks. And so I'm very pleased. That's one of my new favorite, kind of under the hood features of Live 12. But yeah, back to the book things though, the instruments. Then we also in that book, since we wanted to be valid and I wanted the book to really relate to a lot of, especially EDM and younger producers out there, we lean heavily in the second half of the second book on Vital and Serum, because I'm sure everyone listening to this podcast is probably using those two instruments. If you're not, do yourself a favor, because they're great. Mm-hmm. And Vital in particular being free was impossible to resist. I just really love that instrument. And Serum's wavetable editor offers a bunch of cool creative things that you just can't do anywhere else. So that's kind of where the book rounds out. And then in the end of that book, by the way, we're taking all those recordings, putting them back into the sampler, and making libraries full of sounds. And so I wanted to mention that every single chapter in both of the books ends with a series of workflows, like step-by-step things you can do to apply what you just learned in that chapter.
That's
And then
cool.
both of the books have a QR code you can scan with a video tutorial for each individual workflow. So there's like 120 video tutorials that I made that walk through every single workflow. And then with each of those, there's a download button where you can just download the presets.
Oh, that's
So
brilliant.
if you didn't want to learn anything, you could just, scan the QR code and download all the presets. I don't think that's what people are probably doing, but
that's really brilliant. I love that, because a lot of these like technical books, especially if you're following around in a software with the book, it can be easy to get lost in that. But if you've got some videos to kind of bring it into like a visual perspective, that can be nice to have both options for people.
Yeah, like some of these more complicated things, like creating a composite sound with a sampler, like kind of like what we are just talking about. I'll be like, grab a bass drum and a cymbal crash and then some Foley and some like, chickens and some wind sounds, and stack them all up in the sampler and play around with these parameters in the sampler to make like riveting sound effects. And it's easy, reading a book where you're like, okay, this is pretty dense. But when you can just hit the pause button and watch me like kid around and make some incredible sounds, and all the videos are like 3 to 5 minutes long, so they're very ADD friendly, and you can just walk out the other side of that book and have incredible sound design powers.
I love a good chicken sample. You can do a lot with that if you know what you're doing. Have you seen the Sylvia Massey diagram of how to mic a chicken?
No.
Go, if you just like Google how to mic a chicken, Sylvia Massey, she was on the podcast back in the day, but she like legitimately studied how to like properly mic. She actually did it, and then like that became a meme from her actually recording chickens.
Legit. Dude, I have chickens, and I tell you, it is impossible to tie those little fuckers down. Pardon my language, but they answer to no one. So I can't imagine putting a mic on one. It would just be brutal.
If chickens were like bigger than us, we'd all probably be extinct right now. I'm convinced.
For sure.
They would eat all of us. We'd be dead.
They make incredibly just brutalist sounds, and their brains are clearly like tinier than your pinky fingernail, because they don't respond to any sort of stimuli other than food and food.
Somebody told me something ridiculous, that there was the longest headless chicken that ever lived was 18 months without its head.
My children have told me the same thing. Masters of finding meaningless shit on YouTube. That I believe is true. A year and a half with no head. I have no clue how that worked.
Oh, it was in Colorado too. Probably wasn't Frida, Colorado, September of 1945.
They had just all the Coors and cannabis that bird needed just to keep it alive for a year and a half.
It was definitely a weed farm. That chicken just got really high, and it just sustained him somehow. It gave him powers.
Yeah. I mean, how does that even work? How did it eat?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I have a lot of questions regarding this right now.
This podcast is now about chicken impossibilities.
Let's talk about this for the next half hour. So Live 12 is out now. You mentioned the round robin feature and sampler. Do you have other favorite features that maybe you've taught recently, or just things you've come across?
For sure.
And then we can get into the things we don't like, because there's that too.
I know. It's a tricky situation. There's a handful of them for sure. But yeah, on a simple level, I love the scale aware function. I just think that's really fun. I have a lot of students, and not all of them are classically trained. In fact, it's quite the opposite. And so it's really nice to just be able to say, hey, choose a key. Okay, let's go. And it doesn't just do it for you. I mean, it actually helps people learn, because then they see, they can put the clip in scale mode and see, I see this pattern here. And it's not just like handling it for you, which it is, but it's also helping less experienced people with theory learn how notes really work, and then starting to explore some of those other more interesting modes, and being able to have some clips that are not following keys, so you can still have passing tones and notes that are out of key and stuff. And so on a surface level, the scale aware thing I think is really empowering. I also just really love the similar sounds function. I've just been getting lots of joy out of that feature. It's such a simple thing, but I love using it with the drum rack. So one of my favorite things to do, is to load up my favorite, a cool drum kit out of the presets. I don't really know a lot of the presets very much. I don't really use them, but I'll load up a kit and be like, this is pretty sweet, but what would happen if I just hit next on that similar sounds? And you can do it kit wide for those of you who don't know that. Otherwise, if you're I really like the kick and the snare, but I don't like all these goofy percussion sounds, which happens a lot. You get all these weird vocal sounds and stuff, and you can lock the kick and snare or lock any samples that you want to keep and then hit next. And after collecting one shots and drum sounds my whole life, I have almost a terabyte of drum sounds on my computer. And so being able to just hit next and have it all of a sudden load the kit up with sounds that I didn't know that I had is really meaningful. And then I also really love how the similar sounds function is also works inside of the simpler device. So a really fun technique that I love is to take a drum break, like a 2-bar or 1-bar drum break from a funk song or something, put that in the simpler and then hit next. And what it'll do is because it's not just looking for similar clap sounds or hi-hats, it's looking for drum full, 5 to 10 second long recordings. And so you'll be surprised at some of the shit that it comes up with, especially when you're doing the slicing mode. So what I'll do is I'll put a drum break in the simpler, put an arpeggiator on there so it starts slicing the drum break. And then if it's cool, I'll save the preset. And either way, then I just be next. And it's a little left and right arrow in the lower right of the simpler sample window if anyone's listening and looking for that button. So you'll see the waveform in the simpler. You look in the lower right, there's a previous and next arrow, and that's going to search through not only the factory library, but your entire user library as well. So this is another good reason to keep loading up that user library, people, if you're out there and wondering how to really take full advantage of this. If you have your samples all randomly all over your external hard drives and all over the place, this function won't search for those. You got to have them in your user library. So this is good motivation for Ableton users out there to just consolidate all your sounds into your Ableton user library. I took a couple days to do that once this similar sounds thing came out, because I was I have to have this look through a terabyte of drum samples, all the Native Instruments machine expansion packs and all the everything. And so now you just hit next and it'll start loading things up. And I'm a big fan of happy accidents. It's a huge part of my creative process. And because randomness will generate so many meaningful possibilities that you couldn't have planned. And so, full drum break with an arpeggiator in slicing mode and then hit next. And it's you can't help but to crack up every time it loads a new sound, because you're I never would have thought of that. It's so dope.
That's cool.
So a similar sounds thing, I love that. And another thing about 12 that I really like is that's really simple, but the tagging and the filtering in the browser of sounds. And when I first saw that, I was just overwhelmed, because I was this is going to take 1,000 years to tag all of my samples. But what I realized, and this is another cool thing that you guys can try if you're listening to this, is with the similar sounds search, what you can do now, and I've been doing this, is I'll just find a cool snare in the browser and hit the similar sounds button, and it'll pull up, 50 or 100 similar snares. And then you can select all just with Command A or Control A, and then open the filters and then tag them. So basically use the similar sound function as a way to kind of parse your library. You find a cool riser and you're that's a cool riser. Similar, select all, sound effect, riser. And now you just tag 100 sounds at a time.
I've been doing that same thing. That's a really good tip for people too. You can also right click and sort by rank as well if you just wanted to tag your top 20 for each category.
Cool.
Which that's is kind of nice too.
Cool. Yeah. So for more, everyone can enjoy these functions, the scale aware, the similar sounds, the filters. I really like that stuff. And on a little more tweaky level, I really love the generative MIDI tools. I think they're really fun.
Yeah.
I produce for all different kinds of artists. And when I'm working with, pop or hip hop artists, the generative tools are pretty left field. But, for my own art, where I really want to have infinite possibilities and I want the machine to kind of fight back, and it's like a game. I want to kind of gamify the creative process. I want to feel like I'm, on a wild outer space exploration. the generative tools are great. And to get specific about that briefly, I really love the stacks function and I love the
Yes.
seed function. Seed and stacks both, I think, are really like game changers. Seed
Yeah.
I use for melodies and it's just wicked. I mean,
Yeah.
just create a 2 or 4 bar clip and hit seed, go, and turn some knobs. And some of the melodic stuff it comes up with is brilliant.
It is.
It's really
Yeah.
sick. So I've been
Yeah.
loving that. And then the stacks I've been really loving, of course, for chords. But another thing that I've really been enjoying with stacks is I'll take a drum rack and I'll fill it up with a bunch of one shots, maybe like a whole bunch of percussion sounds. And then I'll put an arpeggiator in front of the drum rack. And then I'll start generating stacks. And what it'll do is each stack that it creates will be a different like polyrhythm or percussive sequence. And so because chords combined with an arpeggiator obviously become a rhythm, and so that's been a really fun combination of tools and tricks. Last week when I was in Chicago with Virtual Riot, that was a real crowd pleaser technique that I did. I've been really enjoying that trick a lot.
Yeah.
And then another cool thing about Live 12, I mean, those are probably my favorite things. I also really like Roar. I just put Roar on pretty much everything.
Yeah.
Even just
Same.
the default setting, like you don't even have to dick around with it at all.
Mhm.
You're just like Roar, turn up the drive a little. It's like when they first came out with the Ableton Saturator like 20 some years ago, it was like you can put this on everything
Yeah.
and you don't even have to touch it. You just slap it on there and it
Just
just
drive
makes
it a
everything
little.
sound better.
Yeah.
Roar is totally doing that. So that's really nice.
Yeah, I think drum bus, roar, and saturator are like my 3 instant like betterizer plugins in Ableton.
Yeah. Honestly, yeah, the saturator with a tiny bit of drive, drum bus is so awesome too. Yeah, and Roar is so great. And Roar, is also a sound design playground if you want it to be. But if you're just trying to make your drums sound a little better,
Yeah.
just throw it on there and just leave her be.
100%, especially with the
Yeah.
envelope follower built into it as well. So you can make stuff more dynamic and punchy and saturated at the same time, which is really nice.
I love doing the envelope follower on the individual filter stage amounts or the drive amounts on the individual modules in there. And it just is so lively.
Yeah.
It's wicked.
Yes, 100%. Yeah,
Mm.
definitely, man. I love this stuff. Also, one thing at first, just for anybody who encounters this, similar sounds in the drum rack, if you're scrolling through different sounds, doesn't work on a sampler. And there's a lot of sampler in the drum rack with like different drum rack presets and stuff.
Correct.
So if it's not working, that's probably why. The arpeggiator update, you mentioned the arpeggiator, really nice. I love the new interface of the new arpeggiator. And you can kind of go in and you can visually see the different styles, like random, converge, up, down, like the pattern of how it's going through the notes. So it's kind of a nice way to see like visually where it's stepping.
Yep. And then the fact that it's scale aware is just like so.
Yes.
It's like that's such a simple thing that they probably could have integrated years ago, but now like it's like bumper
Amazing.
bowling, no gutters.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Just let the cat run across the keyboard and it's just like a total win. It's amazing.
That's a great analogy. I've seen a lot of like TikTok videos of people producing with their cats.
For sure.
Not Live 12 makes that easier now.
Finally you can collaborate with Whiskers.
Right. Make some bangers.
Or your dog for that matter.
Also, Granulator 3, I don't know if you've played too much with that. I'm a fan of it. And they've got some nice updates. And then I've actually been having fun just like recording random audio because it's got that I mean, what it capture. Basically, it's like instantly capturing audio over like a very short like second or two, and then it just loops it back.
I'm a huge lover of granular synthesis. I mean, anyone that knows how to use it is going to be. It's so incredible. And Granulator 1 and 2 were just like by my side for ever since their inception into the software. And yeah, Granulator 3 is just a million times more elegant. It just looks better. It's easier to use, more modulation capabilities, dual LFOs, and then the cloud mode is just really tasty.
It's like very smooth. I feel like you could turn anything into a nice pad. You just switch it to cloud mode.
Yep. I'm just like, grab a field recording of anything, put it in cloud mode and play around with the grain size. And then it also has, there's that knob in the middle. I was like the big knob, but it's like variation and you can control what the variation knob does. That's really, really interesting. So depending on which mode you're in, if you're in classic, loop, or cloud mode, the variation knob does different stuff. And then in the detail panel, which is the little horizontal black part of the sample window under the sample. Once you click on variation or click on any of the knobs for that matter, you can control what's modulating them and what they're doing. The variation knob offers for grain size, transposition,
The
a
grain
few other
position,
things.
size and pitch.
Yeah, pitch, grain size. I thought there was one other parameter. It would vary. But yeah, for like clouds of sonic particles, it is just a beast. Love the Granulator 3. Thanks for reminding me.
This episode is sponsored by Magic Mind. Honestly, I am obsessed with this stuff. I take it in the morning, I take it before a workout, I take it before I do a podcast now. It gives you all the mental clarity and focus you need without the anxiety of chugging coffee or any other energy products out there that are bad for you. You might be wondering, Dan, why would I need to spend my good hard-earned money on an energy drink? Well, it's not just like all the other crap out there. It contains 130 times the antioxidants of regular green tea. I actually gave a giant box of it to KMG Studios, where I'm doing in-person podcasts now, and the box didn't last long. A lot of the artists, a lot of the engineers love it there. One little shot gives you a perfect combo of nootropics, adaptogens, functional mushrooms, and includes ceremonial grade matcha, as they call it. It also can decrease inflammation, it supports a healthy immune system. You can take it alongside your coffee or your tea if you're a coffee addict like myself, without giving you that extra jitter or making you feel anxious throughout the day. I can think more clearly. I can be a lot more productive whenever I take this little energy shot. Magic Mind is backed by over 240 scientific studies designed to boost energy, enhance focus, and create a sense of calmness and alertness. And it probably will be the best part of your morning ritual or any other moments where you need that extra boost of focus and memory and energy. Definitely check it out. I don't think you'll be disappointed. It actually tastes good too. Just go to magicmind.com/Ableton. Use the discount code Ableton20 in all caps. That's Ableton20 and save 20%. Highly recommend this stuff. I'll be taking it all the time. And yeah, I definitely recommend for you as well. So give it a try. Go to magicmind.com/Ableton. Check out the link in the show notes for more details. It's a good way to like take any sound and make it your own. Because like I feel like anytime you play with Granulator 3, nobody's going to have that exact sound.
Exactly.
It's just going to be completely unique to you.
Mm-hmm.
So like there's a lot of sterile samples and tracks I hear. I was like, oh, that sounds like Splice, or that sounds like whatever. But the Granulator 3, you can get really creative with how you chop and mesh stuff up.
Yep. Creating your own sound, I think, is really just, it's the thing that really so many modern electronic musicians really want. You know, it's one thing to create a cool sounding track. And I think, you know, there's a lot to be said for that in like the whole producer mindset. But for artists, people who want to be creative and actually like, you know, generate their own original material, just creating your own sound. So down the road, when people hear your music, it sounds like you. It doesn't just sound like another person who downloaded the right splice pack.
Yeah.
A lot of these tools that have like no known use case in Ableton, like Granulator, for instance, it's just kind of like, here's a playground, generate some stuff, and just remember to record. You know, hit record. And that's just a pro tip for people who are listening. When you're using these more no known use case type devices, you want to hit record as often as you can. Like whenever something starts sounding cool, of course, saving a preset is great, but just record yourself jamming on the instrument, maybe get your hands on a push and some knobs or whatever. And then consider that your like rice paddy or mud pie, as they call it, full of cool ideas that you can go and pluck your favorite moments out of. And that's just a great way to be creative with sound in general. And I think a lot of these modern Ableton tools, that's how they're geared to be used.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. I also like that freeze and flattens in one single thing, because I've been doing a lot more just doing that sound design and then just flattening into audio and moving on. I do that a lot.
And they've started to integrate more normalize as a right click option. You can right click in a few different places now and just normalize a sample. Previous versions of Ableton, you'd had to drop the clip into the arrangement view, hit Command J, and then like change the clip gain, and then you would have technically
didn't know that.
Consequentially normalized your sample, but it was just kind of like a 5-click hassle.
Really?
Whereas now you can just right click on the sample window in the clip and say normalize, and it will just turn it up for you. That also works inside of the sampler.
Oh, sick. I didn't know that was a thing now.
Yeah, dude, that's just so nice.
That's why I do
Especially
this
for sound
podcast.
artists, you have some texture background recording or something and you want to boost it up. It's really nice. And in the sampler, you can also normalize pan, which is pretty neat. So
Really?
say you have some sounds that are kind of panned to the right and some that are panned to the left, you can select them all and right click normalize pan, and it will adjust non-destructively adjust the pan for every individual sound in the zones tab to make it so where they're all now centered.
Really?
It preserves their stereo image. It just, if one sound is like louder to the left, it'll pan it to the right a little bit just so you get a more
Oh, yeah. If you click on the actual sample in the zones tab,
in the
you
zones
can
tab. Yeah.
normalize pan or normalize volumes.
Hmm.
That's really sick, especially for like,
No, I wish it was destructive, especially for normalized volume. It's all non-destructive. So in the sampler, the right-click options in the sampler zones tab are non-destructive.
hmm,
And if you're wondering what that means it's not actually re-recording a new sample with the new settings. It's just adjusting the parameters inside of the sampler to where it sounds like you fixed it.
hmm.
And frankly, I think that's better for most cases, but there are times when I really want it just to create a brand new sound that's fixed. And
Which would be ideal for like making a sample pack or like saving it
yeah.
to like share as a preset or something.
Yeah, I use the sampler zones tab. A really cool, tricky workflow is this is a little deep, but I'll move quickly. If you load an empty sampler just to a new MIDI track, just a default sampler, and then you save that into your user library defaults slicing folder, it will then be an available slicer when you right click on an audio clip and say slice to new MIDI track. Your
Mm.
custom sampler will be available there because that has always worked. But the problem is they give you all these default samplers and drum racks that are really goofy with a bunch of like beat repeats and dumb shit on there. And I don't really want that. I just want a bone dry sampler with all my cuts. And so you can slice based on transient. So you right click on an audio clip, slice based on transient, and choose your own custom like default sampler. Then when you open up the zones tab of the sampler, you'll have a zone for every individual transient in your recording, and then you can select all the zones and then right click on the selected zones and choose crop, and that will destructively render a new singular sample for every individual hit in your recording.
Oh, nice. I didn't know
Nice,
that.
right? And so then you can just select one, say show and finder, and you've got your whole pile of cropped sounds now. And it's like a cool little 2-click way to go from a long recording full of individual sounds into a library full of one shots in your user library.
Oh, that's brilliant. There's a Max for Live device made by Toby Hunka with
Yeah,
Ableton Drummer that we included
I
with
got it.
the Resampler Pro, the Max for Live device for people creating
Hmm.
custom sample packs.
I've been using it. Thank you guys for doing that. It's
Yeah.
really cool.
Oh, you could thank Toby. He did most of the work.
Well, thanks, Toby, if you're listening.
He's the best. Yeah. So we released Resampler Pro for free if anybody wants to check it out for making sample packs or like basically taking a bunch of multi-sampled notes and then, putting it into say a sampler to play it back. So you don't like if you want to sample a plugin or whatever else too.
Yeah, that shit is dope. It's kind of like a kind of junior version of Sample Robot. If you're familiar with that, Sample Robot is a
I'm
standalone
not.
application that you can use to create libraries of sounds. It's very, very powerful
Okay.
and deep. Sample Robot, for those of you out there who are creating your own sound libraries, please check it out. It'll generate MIDI notes or not, but it'll also create contact or sampler or Giga Studio or whatever instruments full of one shots based on your recordings, and will like
Hmm.
intelligently analyze your recordings and build sampler presets for you. It's very cool.
That's
But I
wild.
was going to say, Dan, what I really like about your thing you guys made is the first device that's like apply first clip settings to all clips.
Mm.
That's a really powerful sound design tool on its own, because what I'll do is I'll have a whole bunch of clips on the same track. And what you guys can do if you're listening to this, you can go to the very top clip on the first scene and you can adjust the start position, gain, or end position, and then hit a button on the Max device and it will go ahead and adjust those 3 parameters to all the clips in the stack on your track, which is a massive time saver. It was very cool. So I've been really enjoying that, Dan.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that, man. Yeah, that was included in the Resampler Pro download as a separate Max for Live device by Toby. That it's called Edit All Clips Max for
Yeah.
Live device.
I've been using that one in my sound design classes a lot.
Oh, good, man. Yeah, Toby's
Thank you.
great. I think he
Mhm.
has like the record for being on the podcast the most. Him or Brian Funk.
Brian is wonderful. I don't know Toby, but Brian is G.
Yeah, such a nice guy.
I was going to take a minute too, since we're shouting out to other cool people who contribute to this community.
Yeah.
We were talking moments ago about the MIDI transformation and generative tools.
Yeah.
This Ableton certified trainer, well, there's a separate subdivision of certified trainers that are Max certified trainers that are, awesome high powered Max programmers. And there's
Mm-hmm.
one fella by the name of Philip Meyer. I had to look it up real quick. Philip Meyer is amazing, and he made a really wicked all MIDI tools bundle. They're like polyrhythm generators, segment transformers, Turing random generators, condition transformers, feel. Like you can now have a knob that does swing feel in real time right through those little MIDI generative tools. So I highly recommend
What?
looking up on Gumroad Philip Meyer for those of you like
Whoa.
tweaky.
So hold on a second. So I'm looking at this right now, the all MIDI tools bundle,
Yep.
and it's $45, but
Yep.
that's brilliant. So it's actually installed in the transformation tools in the MIDI clip. So when you're using transformation tools, when you install this, it automatically shows up as more options in there.
Absolutely. Yep.
That's
Correct.
really sick. That's so nice.
They're wicked. I mean,
Wow.
um, it just like I would recommend just like grabbing one or two and trying them out, and if you like them, just buy the whole bundle. But you
Yeah.
could just spend a lifetime in there, and they come with really elegant documentation that explains how to use them and how they work. And for idea generators, they're just like on another level. They're so wicked. But then just as far as even practical stuff, like you want to make a really cool snare rush, or you want to make like impossible polyrhythms, they're really, really powerful. So they're transformation tools and generative tools. I think they're mostly transformations. There's like 3 or 4 generative ones, but they're really, really cool. So I was going to recommend those. I've been showing those off to people a lot lately.
Yeah, I had no idea. This is brilliant. I knew there was more like Max for Live capabilities, but I didn't even realize this was part of that.
Yeah, dude.
That's wild. Do you have like favorites inside this bundle, like your go-to, like that you've
Yeah,
used?
I love the Turing machine one. That one is just super hot. And then they have one called Divs MIDI transformer that's really, really neat. What you can do is you can just, you get a slider, you can adjust it and it will subdivide all your notes. So let's say you have a sequence full of quarter notes. When you slide the slider up and down, it'll turn them into 2/8 notes or 4/16 notes or 3, triplets or whatever.
Hmm,
But then what's neat about it is you can say only do that to every third or every fifth note. So you can start to basically create polyrhythmic sequences of subdivisions of your MIDI notes, which is
that's
for
wild.
drums and shit. It's just wild. I really
Yeah,
like that one.
it's brilliant.
There's another one called Develop that's really neat, where say you make a really cool 2-bar loop, you can say develop 4 times and it'll turn it into a 16-bar loop. But what'll happen is the probability will be really low on the first 2 bars, and then as the clip progresses, the probability gently increases more and more. So by like bar 8, you're hearing the full pattern. So
Really
you
cool.
can make progressions of probability or just of note on off. So you can have it in an on off mode. They call it, I can't remember what they call it, but then, the first time you hear it, you only hear a couple hits. It can be really cool for melodies, because you can have like little ghost notes that are hinting at the melody. And by the time you get to like bar 16, it's like a full on legato, like arpeggiation or something. And so these are just examples of fun things you can do with these tools.
Yeah, man,
Yeah,
this is
they're really
sick.
fun. The
This is really
polyrhythm
cool.
generator is really cool for drum racks too, because you can just for creating like Afro beat, Afro rhythms, and cool syncopated grooves. It's polyrhythm generator is really neat.
Yeah, I'm gonna hit him up and be like, "Yo, wanna hook a brother up? Maybe have him on the podcast."
Yeah,
This
do
looks
it.
pretty
You
sweet.
totally should. He's very articulate. There's a video you can find on YouTube. It's about a half hour long of him breaking them all down and how they work, and he's just mesmerizing. He's really articulate and very handsome and
Yeah,
kind and does a
very
great
hand.
job explaining the tools. So I really he's kind of
Yeah,
a little bit of a live 12 hero in my world.
Philip Meyer. Shout out Philip. So maybe we should be a little pessimistic about Live 12.
Yeah.
Like what were some things either disappointing or you kind of wish that they did? Or I mean, everybody has opinions, right? So I've got strong opinions about
Mhm.
some Live 12 things, but I'd be curious to hear if there's anything that sticks out to you.
Yeah, for sure. My least favorite thing is just there were some key commands that were just ingrained into my like bloodstream from 25 years of using the software that they just got rid of. And like they didn't replace them, they moved them to somewhere else on the keyboard or whatever. And but
Mhm.
like why just leave them there,
Yeah,
like
I
showing and
100%.
hiding the clip window with Option Command L.
Yep.
Like, I don't know how many times a day I hit that key command, but it's probably like 100 times a day. And
Yep.
now every single time I need to hide the clip window, I'm like, oh yeah. And the thing is that Option Command L just does nothing now. Like, if they needed that key command for something else, I could see making the hard decision of having to appropriate
Hmm.
it for another function. But
Yep.
just getting rid of it because they just don't like that one anymore, that I don't understand. That
I feel the same way about the return tracks and arrangement view with Option Command R. That made me the most upset. Like even to this day, I just yell at my computer every time I hit that shortcut and nothing happens.
Yeah, that I mean, again, like I think if they were just straight up out of keys and they needed that key command for something else, but when they remove it and then don't just for the sake of getting rid of it, it's not really achieving anything. And it's just for longtime users, it's like a hiccup because now when you're working, you're like, okay, wait, what key command do I need now for this? And you got to like relearn it. And
Hmm.
no big deal, but that's kind of annoying to me. I don't understand what the deal is with that. Um, Also, for 20 years, Ableton just kept all their audio effects in a big, long alphabetical list of audio effects. And when Live 11 came out, everyone was like, grumble, grumble, these fucking folders. And they put them all into, reverb and resonance or drive and color or
Yeah.
delay and loop.
Yeah.
And after a few years of that, I really got used to that.
I
And
did
now they
too.
got rid
And
of
then
the
they took
folders.
away. I know. I felt the same way. Yeah, I was confused by that.
It was cool that you could hide the folders. You could right click and say, get rid of the folders. And like, that was nice if you didn't want them,
Yeah.
but especially for me for teaching, um, it's nice just to say, look, all your dynamics tools are right here. These all affect the volume, and it's for people who are
Hmm.
learning because that big alphabetical list is just like ugly, and having them
Yep.
organized is nice. And there's no way to put them back. And I
Yep.
think that these things I'm complaining about now will eventually be just fixed. I think that Ableton will get enough
Yeah.
complaints about it and they'll be like, fine, we'll replace those old key commands and allow you to right click and put them back in folders. It would be a simple fix. So,
Yeah.
Ableton developers, if you're listening, there's my feature request. So, other
Yeah.
things that I'm not crazy stoked about. I know I really liked the show hide buttons that they had for 20 years on the lower right of the mixer where you could see the IO section and the sends and returns, and those show hide buttons were nice.
Yeah.
And they felt the need to get rid of those.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why would you get rid of those? It's convenient, it's a nice
Yeah.
reminder for people who are learning that these are the things you can see or not see. And
Right.
now, of course, you can click down in that little mixer view thing and you can do it, but it's just, I don't know.
It's very
And then the
hidden.
last thing,
Yeah.
a lot of people are really stoked about being able to show the mixer in the arrangement view, but I really honestly feel like there's
I
just
don't
not
care
enough
about it.
laptop screen real estate
Yeah.
where
Exactly.
once you can see the clip or the device and the mixer, you can't see the arrangement view anymore anyway, so
Unless you have like a 3 foot tall monitor, like
right.
maybe, but
Right. With
not many people do.
modern, laptop resolutions, there's just not that much height to work with anyway.
No.
And so
I agree.
I think it's kind of like, for a person who doesn't have as much experience, they're like, oh, that makes sense. Cool. And it kind of does make sense, but in practical application, there's just not enough vertical resolution to take advantage of that.
Yep.
And I'm a big fan of just hitting tab and seeing a big nice mixer, it's fine.
Yeah. Same.
Or being in two screens mode or whatever. So
We're on the same page. Definitely resonate with all those things.
but then you were mentioning things that it could or should do but does not. I was hoping to have an auto-tune type functionality built in. I mean, every single producer needs auto-tune, and the fact that they decided to not incorporate that into 12, I mean, they could make a badass auto-tune plugin and have it be
Yeah.
built into Ableton or device, I should say.
Yep.
And that just seems like a miss. Like, why would you not build that in there when you know that every single person using it needs it? And then also a stems function. I mean, every producer I know now is like ripping vocals or instruments off of tracks, and they have to go get Serato Studio or Isotope RX or Ultimate Vocal Remover or whatever. And it's like, that should be something I think that Ableton does. It's like the ultimate sound playground. Like, why would you overlook auto tune and stems? They're just like, it's 2024. These are things that people need.
Didn't FL build that in?
I've never heard of that software. I'm just kidding. No, yeah, I think there is a stems thing. On the FL note, have you checked out Orange Clip?
No.
I did this really intense shootout with this really famous hip hop producer that I work with, who's a wonderful person. If you're listening, I love you. And he was always like, so many of my friends making beats use FL, and when they do, it has this certain kind of knock. This kind of like, FL producers can just making things really knock with Ableton takes a little more like finesse. And it's just because Ableton has this floating point audio engine in the mixer. Like, I don't know if you knew this if you're listening, but it's impossible to clip the mixer in Ableton. You can run, I mean, try it. I put like 20 utility effects all turned up to like plus 36 on a track. So the meters were literally like 300 dB over the ceiling. And when you bounce it out, it's not clipping.
Interesting.
Whereas with the FL mixer, if it's in the reds at all, it's evoking like a really kind of nice, hard, knocky, soft clip sound. And so the FL mixer just has a certain kind of nice sound when you run it in the reds. I mean, you may or may not realize this, but like techno, for instance, was invented by people who didn't know what they were doing, like most genres. And so they wanted the kick drum to be louder. And so they'd have this little Mackie mixer and they'd turn the trim up till it was in the reds. And it went from like boom, boom to like,
Yeah.
because of the saturation by the solid state circuitry of the mixer. And FL as a software just does that. And so this really great plugin company called Schwab Digital
Yeah.
that really only makes like one really big plugin called Gold Clip. They just recently put out Orange Clip, and it basically, and they can't say this out loud, but it is the sound of the FL mixer going in the reds. And
Okay.
it's now a VST and it's like $50, and I've been using it and it's really great. I mean, especially
Yeah.
for 808s and kick drums, I feel like it just provides that kind of knock that you could evoke with drum bus and glue compressor and some other kind of finicky shit, but this is just, you just throw it on there and now you're
Nice.
getting that like cold hard knock of FL right
Yeah.
inside of any software. So
I've used standard clip for a while. I think it's like $40 or something. I really like standard clip a lot. It kind of looks like Windows XP. Like the interface is really ugly, but it
sure,
sounds great to me.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's so many great clipping plugins, but I spent a while trying to like engineer that FL Studio clipping sound in Ableton, even just using anything else, and I could get close, but not perfect. And I
Yeah.
feel like the Orange Clip just like it just instantly sounds just like FL, which is kind of neat.
Yeah. A recent track I released called The Drive with Robert Trusco, I just ran it straight into the red in the master. I was
Mhm.
told that there's like either a limiter or a clipper built on the output of Ableton's master. I don't know about individual tracks being run red, but on the master, I don't know if it's a clipper or if it's like a limiter that just stops it at 0.
You know, the master is not floating point, so that's true that when you do run the master in the reds, it does evoke a clipping sound. But if you want that sound on individual tracks, the move is to put the saturator on the track and put it in digital clip mode,
Mm.
and that mode is the sound of the master fader going in the reds. So if you want that sound on individual channels, you got to use the saturator in digital clip mode, and then you're basically simulating the sound of the master channel going in the reds, but on an individual track.
Yeah. So wait,
Mhm.
do you know, or does it sound similar, like as the actual digital clipper of the
I believe it is the
saturator?
same exact algorithm.
Is it? Okay,
Mhm.
interesting. Yeah, I just
Mhm.
didn't know. I've heard rumors about that being a clipper.
Yeah, people like Mr. Bill. have done some really interesting like research in that field. You could call it research, and they are able to create incredibly loud and powerful sounds. There's another homie named Robert Coster who's also an Ableton certified trainer
Yeah.
who has made. He also has a Gumroad you can look up, but he has one called GM Audio Clipper 2. GM Audio Clipper 2 is a very, very nice like digital clipper. It's like clean and loud and sounds great. So
Okay.
for that like super loud, clean digital clipping sound, that's one of my favorite devices, and it's built right in Ableton's or in Macs. So that's
Oh,
great.
sweet. Yeah, I haven't really played with too many Max Clippers, so
Yeah,
it's got
generally
good
it's
reviews.
yeah, it's really, really solid. It's easy to use and it's really nice. He also makes a multi-band one, I think. It's really nice.
Sick.
Check out Robert Coster on Gumroad if you're looking for some fun, tweaky loudness tools.
Yeah, I'm into it. Sweet, man. Those are all good thoughts about like what we hate about live and also like and also good clipping tools. So like moving on, some other questions. I mean, you've been teaching a long time. As far as like mistakes or things that you have seen people do that maybe like they need some guidance in, like what are some like common mistakes you see producers make?
For sure. Well, I can say that like on a meta level, worrying about making it sound perfect is the biggest one. I'd say that one tops the list. There are a handful of like common pitfalls that people fall into that cause great mental anguish while you're
Mm,
learning how to produce. But I would think wanting it to sound perfect out of the box, like right when you get started. Like, I oftentimes say to my students, like, nothing sounds great until it is done and mastered. So
mm,
even if you have like a greatest musical idea ever and you've executed it perfectly, it is not going to sound as good as your favorite artists on Spotify,
mm.
because you got to kick that ball has got to go all the way through the goalposts. It's got to get mastered. So part of being a producer or doing anything creative is having faith in yourself and letting go of this need for perfection. Like I
Yeah.
see a lot of younger producers who are like, I love Skrillex and I hate myself basically because Skrillex is
Yeah.
top dog, top of his game. He's so good, and his even you take or leave his music, the production quality is next fucking level. And
Yeah.
if you're trying to be that, and you're like dropping a kick drum on a track and then a snare, it's going to be really tough. And so a lot of people call this imposter syndrome, because you don't sound as good as your favorite artists, and so you suck at this. And yeah, it's just really that's stinking thinking, because first of all, even if you get really great at sounding like that person, in the end, you're just another kid that sounds a lot like Skrillex or Daft Punk or whatever. It would be much more meaningful of a pursuit to try and create your own sound,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
But as far as just general fidelity and sonics are concerned, you just have to remember, like, even when it's fully mixed and mixed right, it's still not mastered and fully pumped up. And so you're going to A/B it with your favorite songs by your favorite artists. And your music, you got to just have a lot of faith, and you got to just like really ultimately fall in love with the process of creating, and not so much with the realization of completing something that sounds like your favorite artist, because that will come in time if you stay at it. But that time you spend getting there will be very painful if you spend it all like feeling bad about not being good enough. It's a lot
Yeah.
better to fall in love with the creative process and just have faith that in 10,000 hours, you will reach your goal. And let's have those 10,000 hours be full of joy instead of
Yeah.
full of like feeling like you suck at this because you're not as good as your favorite artist. So that's the big pitfall. And then the other, like, just pitfall I think people run into, especially Ableton users, and this is going to probably tug some heartstrings, but I think a lot of self taught people start their tracks on the arrangement view. You know, you open up the arrangement view, you pull in a kick drum, then you pull in a snare, then you duplicate the kick and you duplicate the snare, and then you pull in a hi-hat and you put it in between the kick and the snare. And like, that's cool, but that's how we made music in the like 80s and 90s, and relatively that sucked compared to using the session view for as a sketch pad. And I don't want to sound like Mr. like Ableton like preacher or whatever, because I respect however your creative process works. I know a lot of great producers live their entire life on the arrangement view, but I'm just a big believer in playing music and not just like composing it offline. And if you arrange all your music from ground up on the arrangement view, that music never actually happened.
Mm.
whereas if you start on the session view and you take advantage of the non-linear clip slot grid and you use it as a way to just mix colors and explore sounds and sonic relationships between different sounds. And then once it sounds really cool, then you just dump that over to the arrangement view. I think you'll end up having a much more enjoyable and much more lucrative creative process, because then when you're arranging it, you're arranging something that actually happened.
Mhm.
You're like, these were my best moments when I was exploring, and now I'm going to turn it into a 5-minute track or a 3.5-minute track or whatever,
Yeah.
versus like building something from the ground up entirely offline. Because when you do it that way, you never have this experience of like pushing your fingers through the clay and seeing what happens, because everything is planned out all the time. And
Mhm.
the software isn't actually called Ableton, it's called Live,
Right.
because of its ability to unlock your playing kind of mentality, the ability to just, let's start a drum beat and then bang around on the push or on a keyboard, or just experiment with some random bass notes and then try some shit. And like a painter doesn't put the paint straight on the canvas, they mix it on a palette first until they get the right shade, and then they apply it to the canvas. And I think the session view allows you to have this kind of paint mixing and exploration environment, which, I mean, I dare to say that I would have not stuck with making music at all if it wasn't for that nonlinear aspect of Ableton, because I want to explore the sounds first before I'm arranging them. And I tell my students this all the time, and I always say, what, after you learn all this, if you decide to go back to like importing the kick and then the snare and moving left to right through a composition, you have my blessings. But do yourself a favor and force yourself out of your comfort zone and create some shit on the session view. And admittedly, like, a good track, by the time it's done, 90% of the work at least is on the arrangement view. But allow yourself that initial 10% to just like play and see what comes up out of the ether. And the play space is not the same when you're looping an arrangement versus when you're, just building clips and seeing what sticks. So that's my long answer, but I think
Yeah.
those are some take homes for people. Hopefully, I bet most people listening to this probably are like, "Oh, you can put clips on the session view thing," and it's a huge part of, I don't know, making music for me. And just again, I think great electronic music is not so much made with notes; it's made with sounds. And the way the
Yeah.
sounds change and move over time is what really defines a cool piece of electronic music. And that session view that's where you do that. You know.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of people just skip over session view and they start with live because they just don't know what to do with it. And they're like, oh,
Mhm.
well, this looks familiar. This is linear. Let's just jump to arrangement. I mean, to each its own. Whoever wants to just jump an arrangement, like, good for
Right.
you. I see people do that all the time. But I think session view is like even more powerful for people a lot of times who play live instruments, such as just
Mhm.
like looping ideas. They just want to record audio or MIDI straight into the clips and then
Mhm.
lay them out by scenes.
Mhm.
And that's kind of how I started when I was taught. And I feel like I definitely got the 10% faster when I was working in session view, just playing stuff out and
Mhm.
looping and organizing and then just recording it straight into arrangement.
Right.
So yeah, I definitely agree with that. Also, there's like the new arranger in the performance pack in Live 12 they released, which kind of helps
Mhm.
you do that in arrangement view.
Yeah, cool.
Because it's just like you just basically play it out and then you could set these different points of when it starts recording in and out for certain sections of the song, so you can just like already get those ideas down in arrangement pretty fast.
I cannot wait to play with that. That's one of the new things in 12, maybe the only outlier for me yet that I haven't totally drilled into, but when they first came out with that performance pack, I was like, "Okay, I'm gonna save that for later."
Yeah.
But and it's still sitting out there waiting for me to dig in. It's pretty cool, huh?
It's really cool. I haven't used it on the Push 3, which apparently it's compatible with. I haven't played it, but I think the variations and the performer are like the two best devices in my opinion, or the
Cool.
biggest upgrades, game changers. Because the
Cool.
variations is like, I forget what it was called, but there's a Max for Live device back in the day. What's his face? You could take a screenshot of your project and all the parameters, and then you just change the preset, and then it switches to whatever
Yep.
is happening.
Richie Houghton and the Line made that. I can't remember what that was called, but
Richie
yeah, it was
Houghton
pretty
made it.
finicky, but now they've figured it out how it works.
That's basically variations in the performance pack now, but like on a whole nother level, because you could separate it by like individual track, you could do it by device, you could do it by the entire project, you could do it,
Cool.
you can really separate exactly what you want to happen. So from like a live performance standpoint, it's like unlimited options, which is
That's
amazing.
huge. I've been using CliffX for a long time as a way to, for a live set, you want to hit one button and have it turn off all your effects and turn all your sends down and put your mixer all back to Unity.
Mm.
And the CliffX shit is like, it's basically like learning a coding language. I'm so glad that they figured out a way to get around that for people.
Yeah. Yeah, the nice thing about CliffX is like there's virtually like no latency pretty much. It's like
Mm-hmm.
pretty instant and fast. It's a scripting
Mm-hmm.
language versus
Mm-hmm.
like a Max for Live thing. I
Mm-hmm.
wonder if they've updated the performance pack. When I was using it in beta, it kept crashing and doing weird stuff, but I'm assuming they've got those bugs worked out now, or at least they will soon.
Mm-hmm. I can't wait to play with it.
Yeah, it's pretty sick. That's good advice, though. Thanks for sharing that with people. We're
Mm-hmm.
already over an hour. I feel like we just hopped on this
I know,
call.
right? We could just go forever. Couple nerds in the chat.
Yeah, for real, dude. Honest, I keep seeing you show up in the Facebook Ableton Certified Trainer group,
Mm-hmm.
which is like the only reason I'm on Facebook anymore. But
Mm-hmm.
I always see you're active in there, and everybody's always talking about new stuff. And I feel like I've picked up a lot of things from you in that group, just seeing what you post.
Cool.
Um, I guess like to wrap it up, how are things at Slam Academy? What upcoming projects are you working on? Things you want people to know?
Sure. Yeah, thanks. Things at Slam are great. We're starting our 13th year up here next month, and we've been a certified training center the whole time. It's been really great. So we're growing. We have a lot of big upgrades in the near future, and we have a lot of great staff. The staff and the community there is what makes Slam so great. We have instructors like Evoke from New York and Virtual Riot from Germany. Abstract Sonance is one of our new instructors, is kind of a bass music dude. Prismatic teaches our like American dubstep classes, and a lot of other homies too. Bionic, who like produced Lizzo's first record, teaches all of our mixing and mastering stuff. So we have a really great instructor squad. So Slam is really, really fun. We're still a tiny community. But just a quick plug, you can become a member at Slam for $100 a month. And then you get access to 3 hours a week of online labs with our best instructors, plus 24/7 support on our private Discord server. And then all of our course video library stuff, which is 6 months of Ableton, 6 months of sound design, 6 months of music theory, plus about 40 other short courses. So you get all that for $100 a month. Otherwise, for 200, you get all that. Plus you can take classes. So that includes classes with Virtual Riot, classes with myself, etc. Like we have a vocal production class that's really sick. We have an advanced EDM production class that's really sick. We have a house and techno class, an IDM class, dubstep class, so genre specific ones too. So we have advanced and beginner classes. So you can get all that stuff for relatively pretty cheap, considering that private lessons with any of those instructors is about $100 an hour, but you pay $100 and you get it all month, all day. So it's really wicked. Slam is really fun. We're really trying to provide much, much more than just a bunch of videos or like a YouTube subscription, because these are real live human beings who are making bangers, who
Mm.
like live to help other people figure it out. Not to keep mentioning Virtual Riot, but if you're familiar with his work, that's the level that we operate on at Slam. So very, very forward thinking, advanced electronic music production stuff going on there all day long, and it is riveting. So if anyone's listening and they want to get more than just a bunch of tutorials, but actually a human being that's great at this that wants to help you, check out slamacademy.com. That's awesome. Thanks for the opportunity to offer the plug. And when you mentioned upcoming projects, I'm writing curriculum for some high schools, trying to develop that. I just want to see more young people getting into making music, not like traditional playing cello and trombone, but playing the push and stuff. So I want to be a part of that movement. Some beta testing of some new toys for undisclosed developers that will see the light of day soon. I'm excited about that. And also my own live performance. Just about every weekend I'm doing either a drum and bass gig or a late night house and techno gig. And so I still DJ a lot. And that's a big exciting thing for me. And the last thing I wanted to mention is this year I'm bringing my kids to Burning Man.
Oh
Pray for me.
yeah.
Yeah. So they're finally
Amazing.
old enough to like get it. And so we're going to go and load them up and freak them out. And it's going to be awesome. So I'm really excited about that.
That's amazing. Yeah, I'm sure that'll be a life-changing experience for them.
For sure. Yeah, so that's the quick answer. I want to respect people's time and stuff. But yeah, if anyone wants to learn more about any of the stuff we've talked about today, my email address is jp@slamacademy.com. Pretty easy. You can hit me up there. Also, again, if you go to Amazon and search Ableton Sound Design, you'll see my books. And scan the QR code. You'll be involved in a big, long, dense course full of great sound design tricks. It's all included for free with the books. So and that also comes with our Discord membership. So you can start dipping into the Slam Academy community for just, $45 or whatever. So
Awesome, man. Everybody listening, I'll include links in the show notes as usual. So go give JP a follow and Slam and all these things. Check out the book, which I'm excited to check out soon whenever you send it to me. Yeah, man, it's good seeing your face. Thanks again for being on the podcast.
yeah, Dan, it's my pleasure. I appreciate you very much.
Hey, thanks for listening to the podcast. Do me a huge favor if you would and hit that follow or subscribe button wherever you're listening to the podcast. If you don't hate the podcast, please leave a 5-star review. It would help me out a ton. Don't forget to check back on Tuesdays for new episodes. If you want to be the first to get new episodes and stay updated and get free new devices and sample packs and other stuff that I'll be sending out in the future, join the newsletter. Just go to liveproducersonline.com/newsletter and or check out the links in the show notes. Make sure to give this guest a follow on the socials, give them some love for spending their time. And once again, thanks for listening to the podcast. I will see you next time.